28 people went to Antarctica from England in 1914. The 28 people became stranded and shipwrecked in Antarctica, and they survived for 2 years, and they all came home alive. The number of lessons in this story are endless. We could stand here until midnight on Friday, literally, and not cover the same lesson twice and apply each of them to the things that matter most in people's everyday lives, both on and off the job. The biggest lesson, the biggest takeaway from the story actually has to do with this picture. Because in this picture, you notice the ship stuck in the ice in the background. They could not move that. It was stuck in 20 feet of ice. And so what Shackleton did, the leader this was a really smart move. Shackleton said, let's leave the ship alone. We have no control over the ship. Let's concentrate on a game. Now, what's interesting, metaphorically, this picture speaks to us very loudly and clearly in our everyday lives. Because that ship is stuck and they have no control over it, that ship represents everything in your life you have zero control over. Which the last time I checked, that's a pretty extensive list for most of us, right? The game represents our response to the circumstance, of which we have 100% control. We can say yes, we can say no, we can go left or right or up or down. We have full control over it. So every time you see this image, it's going to speak to you. It's going to say, let go. Let go. And you think about all the things people have to let go of in their lives every day, right? Business people have to let go of control. They have to let go of outcomes, decisions that customers make. There's so many factors out of our control.
Welcome to the Mindset Game podcast. I'm happy to introduce you to our special guest, whose name is Mike Pierce, better known as Antarctic Mike. Mike is an avid fan of polar exhibition history and is an endurance athlete. In 2006, Mike became one of 9 people to run the first ever Antarctic ice marathon, and a year later became the first American to run the Antarctic 100K, a grueling 62 miles on an ice shelf 600 miles from the South Pole. Since then, Mike has completed many other winter marathons in the coldest and harshest climates on Earth. His stories have been featured in Sports Illustrated and on CNN, Fox, ABC, CBS, ESPN, and many other national and international media outlets. Mike works with organizations that want to find, engage, and keep the best performing people. And he trains senior leaders on how to lead people so they are fully engaged in what they do. His flagship program, called Keep Conquering, connects the drivers and principles of Antarctic exhibition history stories to the real world of finding, engaging, and keeping great people in today's business world. Now, both Mike and I are speakers for an amazing organization called Vistage Worldwide that has over 46,000 CEO members. And Mike, it is such an honor to have you on the show. I've heard such great things about you over the years, and finally here we are together to meet and have this awesome conversation. So thank you.
Thank you. You know, you're one of these people that I feel like I've known for about a third of my life, but I've never met until today.
I feel the same. And it's just such a delight to get to hear your story and to get to meet the soul behind the story and all the gifts that you've been able to give to people as a result of your experience. So let's dive right in. Tell us about Antarctic Mike. What is that? Tell us the whole story behind that.
Okay, the backstory is this. February 13th, 1985, Durango, Colorado. 2 years before I met her, my wife Angela fell 150 feet off a mountain, breaking nearly every bone in her body. That's why in the year 2006, I went to Antarctica twice. Okay, I'll explain. It started in August of 2001. I was on a business trip in Bakersfield, California. I walked into a bookstore, just a random visit to a bookstore. On the end cap of one of the shelves in the business section of the store, I saw this photograph, and it was on the cover of a book titled Shackleton's Way. I had no idea who Shackleton was, what the story was, or how it had anything to do with business. So I picked it up. And within 10 minutes, I got it. Basically, the overview of the story is 28 people went to Antarctica from England in 1914. The 28 people became stranded and shipwrecked in Antarctica, and they survived for 2 years, and they all came home alive. The number of lessons in this story are endless. We could stand here until midnight on Friday, literally, and not cover the same lesson twice and apply each of them to the things that matter most in people's everyday lives, both on and off the job. The biggest lesson, the biggest takeaway from the story actually has to do with this picture. Because in this picture, you notice the ship stuck in the ice in the background. They could not move that. It was stuck in 20 feet of ice. And so what Shackleton did, the leader was, this was a really smart move. Shackleton said, let's leave the ship alone. We have no control over the ship. Let's concentrate on a game. Now, what's interesting, metaphorically, this picture speaks to us very loudly and clearly in our everyday lives. Because that ship is stuck and they have no control over it, that ship represents everything in your life you have zero control over, which the last time I checked, that's a pretty extensive list for most of us, right? The game represents our response to the circumstance, of which we have 100% control. We can say yes, we can say no, we can go left or right or up or down. We have full control over it. So every time you see this image, it's going to speak to you. It's going to say, let go. Let go. And you think about all the things people have to let go of in their lives every day, right? Business people have to let go of control. They have to let go of outcomes, decisions that customers make. There's so many factors out of our control. Think of all the factors outside of our control in a marriage, a simple marriage. I mean, let's take Angela, for example. Let's say Angela and I are not getting along. Okay, we're arguing. We're starting to fight, okay? There's the volume levels going up. There's bad words you don't want the kids to hear, right? This is called a marital fight. I mean, this happens to all of us, right? The little voice on this side of my head says, don't make a big deal out of this. And of course, the competing voice on the other side of my head says, yeah, but you're right. And of course, then there's this battle, right? And I say to myself, okay, wait a minute. I've seen this movie too many times. I'm going to let it go. And it's amazing because when we decide to let it go, the volume level comes down, right? Angela and I can actually have a real conversation. Wow, it's like magic, right? Not really. It's what happens when somebody makes a decision to let go, right? So this whole point about letting go has become a cornerstone in my message for the last 20 years. And I give copies of this picture to every participant who's ever been in any audience I've ever had. And I mean, people keep these pictures for years. I did this in Baltimore, Maryland, 12 years ago. I was speaking at a corporate event. It was a small high-tech company in downtown Baltimore, and the company was owned by a guy named Matt Goddard. Okay, so I go and I do the speaking engagement in Baltimore, and I don't think twice about it. I do it, and I come home, and my life goes on. Now we're going to fast forward the clock, 12 years. Now it's November 28th of last year, in the year 23. There's a story on LinkedIn written by a guy named Chris Chodnicki. I have no idea who Chris is. The story is about Matt Goddard, and I recognize the name Matt, so I read the story. And the story basically says, Matt's a really smart guy. He started this company. It impacted a lot of people. And last week, we said goodbye to him. Matt Goddard died in mid-November of last year. So I took the time to write to Chris, not knowing who he was. And I said, Chris, I'm sorry to hear about Matt. It's amazing how things in life can strike in the middle of the night without warning. Chris writes back to me, Dear Mike, thanks for reaching out. By the way, I still remember the day Matt brought you in. I'm like, no way. This guy, Chris, was there 12 years ago. I just didn't remember it. And then he said this. In fact, when Matt was first diagnosed with cancer, I pulled out the picture that you gave us because I love the whole idea of letting go of what you can't control and focusing on what you can. He said no truer words for the final year of his life. And I thought, you have to be kidding me. 12 years after the fact, somebody remembered something that I said. Somebody pulls out a picture that's probably dust covered from 12 years ago in a moment that's as important as somebody dying of a terminal illness. I almost fell out of the chair and cried. And I thought, these stories change people's lives. Well, it's funny how I've been the teacher of this for a long time. Well, the very next day, the teacher became the student. The very next day, Angela had to go to the hospital. You can imagine with an accident like hers, the number of visits we've had to the hospital is, I think I have more frequent flyer miles at Scripps Hospital in San Diego than I do on Delta Airlines. And I have a lot on Delta. So she goes to the hospital. Now, this is her 12th visit of the year because Angela is a dialysis patient. She has problems with her kidneys. So she had catheter problems and blood pressure problems all year. And they replaced the catheter like 4 times last year. So I thought, okay, well, they're going to go and replace the catheter. No big deal. So I take her to the hospital and I stay with her until she's going to get admitted because they have to admit her for a surgical procedure to do a catheter. So it's about 11 o'clock at night and they admit her and I go home because I got to sleep. It's 2:12 in the morning. My phone rings. It's a colorectal surgeon, a surgeon, right? This is the person with the knife. The surgeon calls me and she says, Mike, if I don't do this emergency surgery on Angela's colon right now, she's probably not going to see the morning. Imagine getting that phone call, right? So I hang up with her. I call Angela. No way. I would rather call hospice and go home. I spent the next hour trying to arm wrestle her into this surgery, right? Because I care about her. I love her. I don't want her to die. And I thought to myself, now it's my turn to let go. Now what I'm being called to let go of is a decision that somebody else made that I didn't like. And I thought, how many of us out in the real world every day have to let go of decisions that other people make that we don't like? I mean, this applies to all of us every day. So Angela, miraculously, even though she doesn't have the surgery, she lives through the night. But what we discovered about 3 days later, the reason she had so many problems last year with her catheters and her blood pressure was because her vascular system was collapsing. Vascular system meaning blood vessels, arteries, and veins. And unlike the hip that I had replaced in November of last year, you can't replace a vascular system. It's not possible. So I'm sitting in the hospital with Angela. This is around December 10th of last year. And she said, Mike, I'm looking at colon surgery. I'm looking at possibly a kidney transplant, and I'm looking at blood transfusions. On top of a vascular system that doesn't work? No way. She said, it's time to unplug and go home. I knew exactly what she meant. And if a dialysis patient unplugs, they don't live very long. The average length of life is 7.4 days. That's how much you and I and all your viewers depend on our kidneys every minute of every day. So Angela completely unplugs and comes home on the 21st of December. Now, I had to call hospice and get all this set up because I knew where this was going. So she comes home on December 21st, and she looks good. She walks up the stairs. She's playing with the cat. She's laughing. And I'm watching this conversation between the hospice nurse and Angela, and I'm thinking, I don't even know why I called these people. This is like a conversation like you and I would have. But I knew it wouldn't last. And it started to go downhill on Christmas Day. And then we had to move her into a hospice care facility because I couldn't manage her. And, hospice at this point is just basically making sure people don't hurt. They're not going to make people better, but they make sure they don't hurt. So I'm sitting in there with her. This is now December 28th. It's about 8:30 in the morning. I'm sitting right by the bed. She's asleep. And I'm talking to her. And the doctor says, talk to her. She can hear you and understand you, even though she can't respond. He said, hearing is the last thing that goes. So talk to her. So I'm talking to her. And I said to him, how long do you think, Doc? And he says, probably a couple of days. Okay, so I'm talking to her. Now it's about 11:45 in the morning. And I was going to go take a break and eat lunch and come back in the afternoon. So I said, Ange, I'm going to go eat lunch and I'll be back. Thank you for 34 Christmases. If you want to go, it's okay. I left. 15 minutes later, she left. And I thought to myself, I have learned more about what this means in 30 days than I have in the previous 57 years of my life. And you think about it, letting go is so hard. The number of fights we heard on that hospital floor in the month of December between the families and the medical staff. Do we pull the plug or not pull the plug? Do we do the procedure or not do the procedure, right? And the doctor would be like, ma'am, I'm sorry, we can't. No. We're going to do everything. I want to get more machines and more blood tests and more transfusions. Why? Life, Angela and I talked about this. Life is designed to start and finish. And if there's no finish, there's no love, right? Think about it. If Angela could live, let's say I could have her for 10 million years, okay? 10 million years. And I'll pick the perfect age. Let's call it age 28, okay? So there's no health problems. There's no teeth problems. She never needs her hair cut or colored. I'm going to save a lot of money on that budget, right? There's no credit card overspending. There's no yelling at your husband. There's no problems, right? And I could have this for 10 million years. I'd be married to a mannequin, right? And even mannequins have a shelf life because plastic degrades. It's like God puts this little voice in the back of our minds and it says, Mike, you'd better enjoy this time because it's not going to last forever. And I think that's why moments with our kids, our spouses, our siblings, people that are close to us, right? The people that matter to us, why it's meaningful is because it's limited. It's not forever. If it would go forever, you would never sense anything special about it. And so I think because I understand that's the design of life, right? For our benefit, I think that's partly what has enabled me to let her go. Because she did her time and the time's over. The time's going to come, it's going to come over for all of us. And it's funny because in our culture, there's sort of this built-in mindset that says, fight at all costs, right? Keep going, fight at all costs. And if you don't, then you're a loser, right? That's kind of baked into our culture, right? So I had a friend of mine, he's a close friend. He called me right after Angela died and he said, did she quit? And I said to him, let me tell you something about quitting. There's a big difference between quitting and getting knocked out by Mike Tyson.
Mhm.
And I didn't have to say anything else. I said, all of us one day are going to get knocked out by Mike Tyson. That's just called real life.
And I appreciate that you're sharing this with all of us. I imagine everybody listening has experienced some version of loss in their life. Maybe it is a person, maybe it is a pet, maybe it's a loss of an expectation,
Right.
an idea, maybe a job or something like that. And at the heart of all of those losses and the deep grief that comes with it is that we must accept and let go. And until we do, our body is holding on. It's still attached to something. And we're holding ourselves hostage, and to some degree, metaphysically, perhaps holding the other being hostage as well by not letting them go.
True.
And so letting go requires us to make a decision, right? And to make a decision that we accept that our life will be different, that things are not going to be as is, so that we can begin to go through the psychological realignments, the mindset shifts that we need to make to adapt to a new life, a new day-to-day routine, all of that stuff. And when there are parts of us that may feel guilty to let go. I've heard from many people, I can't let them go
Hmm.
because then I'm not honoring them. It's as if I'm
Right.
disrespecting them,
Right.
because I
Right.
shouldn't be just going on and being happy in my life and living my
Right.
life. And so, that's something that a lot of people struggle with. And in a sense that it elongates the grief period to the point that they may never fully accept the loss because they just don't give themselves permission to. So, if I may share kind of a quick example.
Sure.
So I lost my father about 5.5 years ago.
Oh.
And he too was at a place where he couldn't battle anymore. There was nothing else that could help him. He learned from the doctor the medicine wasn't working anymore,
Mm.
and that was it. And so he was ready to let go and, said goodbye to all of us. Perhaps like Angela got to say a proper
Right.
completion, which is really important. And it wasn't actually at the hospital until my mom said, when he was already in a what we thought was a coma and said, you can go now. I'm letting you go. And within
Mm.
moments, he took his last breaths,
Wow.
and that was it.
Wow.
Yeah, and I've heard that from other individuals that work at hospice and so on, that it's really the family members giving permission, and then it's like they can go. And it's such a kind, loving thing to do to help people to let go. And so, what do you say to people who really are struggling with letting go?
That's a good question. And I think it's true. I mean, I told this story for the first time about 3 weeks after Angela died. I was in Chicago, and lady who owns a business looks at me and she said, "My sister died 4 years ago. I've never let her go." The lady sitting next to her says, "My stepson is 51. His real mom died at 14. He's not let his mom go in 30 years. And it's become like an anchor around his neck, and it's dragging him to the bottom." And I thought, this is an epidemic. Like you said, your family members. I mean, it's loads of people that have these anchors around their necks because they haven't let go. And I guess what I would say to people is, the one thing that I learned from Antarctica, like I became so inspired by that story that's why I decided to go to Antarctica in 2006. I ran a marathon on an ice shelf 600 miles from the South Pole. And a year later, I went back to run what they called the Antarctic Ultra Marathon, which was 100 kilometers, which is 62 miles for those of you that are from the United States that don't remember the conversion of the metric system. It's about 62 miles. And how I trained for this was kind of comical because I live in San Diego and it's not very cold here. And there was no chance Angela was going to go to Minnesota or Canada or Siberia, right, for me to get ready. So I trained inside a commercial freezer. And the freezer was small. It was 59 feet from one frozen metal wall to the other. And I went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Now, you would think that the monotony of that would drive somebody crazy. And it kind of did at first. But then I remembered something I learned from an old hockey coach. I grew up in Allentown, Pennsylvania, which is right outside of Philadelphia. And I used to play hockey as a kid. One night, my hockey coach says to me, "Mike, you're going to play the game the way you practice. If the practice is harder, the game's easier." Guy skates away, right? What he was basically telling me was look at difficulty differently. And so, what I would say to people who haven't let go, look at loss differently. Look at the difficult things in your life differently, right? Most people run away from loss, they hide from it, right? No, move toward it, right? Move toward it. And this is what my hockey coach taught me in 1976 as an 11-year-old kid. And it's funny because that freezer then, you'd think the value of a freezer, and it was cold in there, it was like minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit. But the real value of the freezer had little to do with temperature acclimation, but rather it had everything to do with building these muscles and changing my paradigm about how I saw difficulty. And it's funny because right around December 10th, when Angela was in the hospital and she was still doing fairly well. I was real when she discovered that her vascular system was collapsing, we knew that was the end. And I was having a really hard time with this. Like I just emotionally, I couldn't get my head in the game. Angela looked at me and she said, Mike, it's time for you to go back in the freezer. I knew exactly what she was saying. And it was at that moment when I shifted and I made the decision to go toward the difficulty instead of away from it. And I just looked at all the events of December, including when she died around noon on December 28th. I just looked at that and I moved towards it. I embraced the difficulty. I looked for the silver lining in the cloud. I looked for the lessons that I could learn from that. And I looked for opportunities as far as how can I help other people? Because Angela's message to me is very clear. Go help people. Go help them. Look, Mike, my race has been run and it's been completed. Yours is not yet completed. And you're here for a reason. And the reason is to help other people. Go. Right? And I think I learned that because I went toward that difficulty instead of away from it. And I think that's my message to people. Look for opportunities to embrace the things that are hard in life. Don't run away from them and hide from them. Move towards them.
Thank you. And a lot of that comes down to those paradigm shifts, those mindset shifts. You know, we traveled as a family to Colombia a few months ago, and we got to meet with this medicine man from one of the very indigenous communities in the Tayrona National Park.
Wow.
These are kind of off the grid, think no electricity, no solar panels, even like nothing,
wow.
Right? And I remember that when he was willing to meet with us, he actually is the only person from the tribe that kind of has gone out. And before he was born, the head of the tribe kind of said, "You're going to be a medical doctor," when he was still in the womb. And so his whole life knowing that was his destiny, is to leave the village and become a medical doctor, which he did. So we got to meet with him with an interpreter. And kind of hearing about their mindset around loss and death. And they do not believe. It's a very spiritual, as you can imagine, community. They don't believe that there is death. And so I said to the interpreter, I said, "Are you trying to tell me that if a child passes away, a parent, a spouse, that they don't grieve?" And he said to me, "No, they don't. They don't grieve. Because they don't believe that it's an ending." So the next day they have a burial and they have a celebration, and then the community embraces the parents or the spouse or whoever it is that experienced a loss, and they support them. And there is no sadness because there is no loss. So
Wow.
it is, that's what I said. Wow. I mean, almost to the point that this interpreter was also a doctor, and he would go every 3 months to these different communities.
Sure.
And he said, sometimes I would advise for a certain medical treatment, and the head of the tribe would say no. And I said, "Really? Does that mean that sometimes people pass away?" And he said, "Oh yeah, many times there have been children that died, even though they could have gotten the antibiotics or whatever the medicine was." And I said, "Don't people get angry about that they, this person could have been saved?" And they said, "No, because they trust the head of the tribe. They're very spiritual, and they believe when the time is there to let go, when it's completion, it's time for completion. And it's not an end. It's a transformation, a transmutation to a different form of energy." And so again, our responses to loss are oftentimes due to our mindsets, our beliefs about what it means, right? If you and I grew up in a community that from the very beginning, from the moment that we were born, and even before that, intergenerationally, there was a deep mindset, a belief in the field that there is no loss, we would believe the same thing. We would not know anything different because that's how we would be conditioned to believe. So if there's nothing to lose, there's no sadness. Yeah. So it's just it's a change, and that's all it is, without that added energy to it. So I want to kind of redirect our conversation on loss here to the lens of change in life, change in an organization, because essentially it's the same grief curve, Yes, when there is a
Sure.
change that especially ones that we are not aware of, uh, it's very common for us to dip, energetically, our morale, our productivity, to experience, anger and defensiveness, trying to control what we can, right? That place where perhaps you were at the beginning, trying to talk her into changing her mind, or right, all of that. We try to control what we can. And then that doesn't work, of course, right? Because it doesn't heal the loss, what we feel inside, right? The deep
Sure.
sadness. And so we tend to dip even more into despair or full-blown depression. And then that's the point where most people, their psyche is like, okay, it's too much pain, no more. And there's got to be another way. And I really honor you for the many experiences that you've had. Those mindset shifts happened long before. And you were able to, I mean, it was still difficult, and you even said yourself it wasn't easy, but that curve was not quite, it sounds like, as steep or quite as long as it is for some other people, because in Angela's words, right, you've been in that freezer, and you've trained, and you've gotten yourself adapted to that. So tell us more about that mindset. What is the mindset or mindsets that people need to embrace to find more ease during times of change and uncertainty?
Change is a form of difficulty, just like loss is. And of course, the different forms of difficulty have varying degrees of difficulty. And we understand that. They come in all sizes, shapes, colors, and varying degrees. Regardless, I'll use the example of the animal, the buffalo. Okay, now, generally speaking, in the United States, the storm patterns move from the west to the east, right? They follow the jet stream. And so you think about all the animals out on the plains. When the storms come, most of the animals scatter. They run away from the storm. Or if they're like my cats, they hide, okay? They hear the thunder and they hide under the bed for 3 days, right? Not the buffalo. The buffalo is one of the only animals in the world that actually moves into the storm. So if this is the storm and it's coming this way and here's the buffalo, they move into it. You think about the logic of this. The storm's going to come and do what it does regardless of whether you're going this way or that way, because you can't outrun the storm. It's going to catch up with you eventually. But if you actually move towards it, like, you see how you get through it faster with less damage? Pretty interesting how the buffalo intuitively knows that. And I think the moral of the story and the answer to your question is be the buffalo.
Mhm.
Go into the change, go into the difficulty, embrace it, just like I had to do with something called loss. Whatever the difficulty is, whatever size, shape, or color or degree it is, move toward it. Run into it, not away from it. And I think that's how you get through the change or the circumstance or whatever it is with, call it, minimal damage or less damage, if you move toward it and look for, like, let's say it's an organizational change. Let's say, for example, you work for a company and the company just got sold. And so there's going to be we know that when a company is bought, there's going to be all kinds of structural changes as far as leaders and roles and titles. That's just going to happen, right? Embrace that. If you're a good worker, you're going to be on the team. Now, your seat might change, your title might change, and the role that you play might change. But if you're valuable to the company, they're going to want you. So if you know you're a good worker, you don't have to worry about that. And even if your job's eliminated, there's another company out there that needs you. So, and there's plenty of companies to work for, right? So the point is, embrace that change. Look forward to that in terms of, gee, I wonder what I'm going to do now. I wonder what ways I can serve now that might be different. Skills that I'm going to have to learn that I don't yet know. I'm going to be providing value in ways I never understood I could provide. I'm going to build relationships with people that I may not know. I mean, there's a lot of good things that are going to come out of this thing called change, even if it's to that degree of severity.
Yeah. And I love that metaphor of the buffalo kind of moving toward the storm, because it really is that mindset of embracing change, of also to some degree anticipating change, because as you said earlier, there's going to be loss. Any of us are not going to be here forever, right? So nothing is permanent. And
Right.
so, with that mindset, we just don't know, is it going to be tomorrow, or is it going to be when we're 99 plus years old? So
Correct.
the idea here is And I think of change as like, okay, we said, you're going from point A to point B, right? And it is through a transition. And what we know for sure, and you clearly experienced this, is in order for us to even be willing to go into a transition, to be able to adapt our thoughts, our emotions, how we're being in the world, in this new world, we need to have completion. We need to first let go and grieve that which is no longer true. Even if it's, if we have a new baby, if we move to a new house, right, we still have to complete our old model of the world, our old way of being, before we can fully embrace, be like that buffalo walking toward or running toward the change. And that place of completion, it requires us to be with our emotions. We have to be able to go inward and accept how we feel, label how we feel, allow the energy to move, to release those attachments. We can't release the attachments until we get the learnings. I'm so, so grateful to you, Mike, for sharing from your heart today. I truly feel Angela's presence in our conversation. I unfortunately did not get to meet her. And I imagine she's just a beautiful angel of sorts right now for all of us. And I thank you for bringing her energy into our conversation. And a lot of love for you.
Thank you.
And a lot of gratitude for you to continue to share the messages of, of what is possible for human beings when we're willing to go into those places, those difficult places in our life, be it, running 100K in Antarctica or going through a deep loss of sorts, of any type, and going into it,
Exactly.
and allowing the feelings to be felt. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
And how can people learn even more about you, your awesome programs, your books?
You can find me on YouTube. Just keyword search Antarctic Mike. Just spell Antarctic correctly. There's 2 C's in the word Antarctic. It's very easy to misspell. Or you can go to my webpage, antarcticmike.com, and you can see how to get a hold of me, ask me questions. You can call me. You can email me. I'll spend as much time with you as you like. I welcome your calls.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mike. And I wish for you to continue to keep conquering life and joy and all that is. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Hi, Game Changers. Thanks for tuning in to this special episode with Mike Pierce on letting go and the process of doing that. And if you want to learn more about surrendering, I invite you to check out episode 122 with Kurt Blackson. He is an amazing inspirational leader, transformational teacher, wrote The Magic of Surrender, which is a great book. And I invite you to check out that episode. I think that you will learn a lot as well that could be beneficial for you. So all my love.